Guilty! The gavel slammed with the finality of a coffin lid. Martha Simmons didn't flinch as she transcribed the word, her fingers dancing across the stenotype machine with practiced precision. Behind her calm exterior, her heart sank for the young defendant, barely 18, caught stealing medicine for his diabetic mother. Another casualty of a system that processed people like paperwork. This was the 43rd unnecessary guilty verdict she'd witnessed this month alone. After 27 years recording every word spoken in Courtroom 9 of the Westfield County Courthouse, Martha could recite the script of injustice in her sleep. Judge Harrison Ferguson would now deliver his standard lecture about personal responsibility, completely ignoring the desperate circumstances that drove most defendants to their crimes. Behind her wire-rimmed glasses and sensible cardigan, nobody suspected that Martha Simmons, the 56-year-old court stenographer with the tight grey bun and seemingly invisible presence, was secretly the most powerful person in the Westfield County judicial system. For nearly 15 years, she had built an intricate web of connections spanning every level of the courthouse, from janitors who, accidentally, left certain office doors unlocked after hours, to clerks who misfiled damaging evidence against sympathetic defendants, to bailiffs who whispered information about which judges might be lenient on certain cases. Martha wasn't naive. She understood the necessity of law and order. But in a county where the public defender's office handled over 3,000 cases annually with just 4 attorneys, where the jail was 300% over capacity, and where judges were elected based on conviction rates rather than fairness, someone needed to balance the scales. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Martha packed her stenotype into its weathered case. The courthouse was emptying for the day, lawyers and clerks hurrying to beat the 5 o'clock traffic. Judge Ferguson had already disappeared into his chambers, likely pouring his customary 2 fingers of bourbon before reviewing tomorrow's docket. Martha moved with purposeful slowness, waiting for that perfect window of time when the building existed in limbo. Not quite empty, but with enough people departing that no one would notice her slight detour to the records room. As she passed the public defender's desk, she casually dropped a folded post-it note. Rodriguez case. Check juvenile record admissibility. Precedent in State v. Miller, 2014. No signature needed. These anonymous tips had become something of a courthouse legend over the years. Burning the midnight oil again, Ms. Simmons? The unexpected voice froze Martha's hand on the records room doorknob. She turned to find Judge Sophia Chen, the newest addition to the Westfield bench, leaning against the wall, leather briefcase in hand, and curious eyes fixed on Martha's face. Unlike Ferguson and the other old guard judges, Chen had arrived 6 months ago with a background in public interest law and a reputation for thoroughness that made Martha simultaneously hopeful and wary. "Just retrieving a transcript file I forgot earlier," Martha replied, her voice neutral despite her racing heart. Had she been followed? Judge Chen's head tilted slightly. "Interesting, because I was just in the records room myself, and I noticed something peculiar. The Rodriguez case file has been flagged for special review by someone without authorization to make such requests." Judge Chen glanced around the empty hallway before continuing, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to understand this courthouse since my appointment. The unusual pattern of successful appeals from certain defendants, but not others. The convenient timing of evidence revelations. The strange coincidence that every case I flag as problematic seems to resolve itself before I can intervene." Martha remained silent, her expression carefully blank, even as mentally she calculated the contents of her emergency fund. Enough for 3 months on the run, maybe Canada, maybe her sister's place in Arizona. But Judge Chen wasn't calling security. Instead, She wore an expression Martha couldn't quite interpret. It took me 4 months to connect the dots. Every unusual intervention, every mysterious correction of injustice, they all had only one common element. You were present for every single one. Judge Chen's response came as soft as a prayer and as unexpected as grace. Report you? Ms. Simmons, I want to help you. The judge's eyes held none of the condemnation Martha had anticipated, only a fierce intelligence and something that looked remarkably like respect. Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone who truly cares about justice rather than just the law? Someone who's spent decades learning how to navigate this broken system not for personal gain, but to protect those the system fails? Martha blinked, certain she had misheard. I don't understand, Your Honor. Judge Chen smiled, a small conspiratorial curve of her lips. Let me be clearer. I believe we share the same concerns about how justice is administered in this courthouse. The difference is that you've been working from the shadows, while I have actual judicial authority. What we could accomplish together? Martha entered the records room with renewed purpose, her movements quick and efficient as she located the Rodriguez file and several others flagged for tomorrow's docket. She wasn't naive enough to trust Judge Chen completely. 27 years in the courthouse had taught her that good intentions often crumbled under political pressure. But for the first time in over a decade, she allowed herself to imagine a partnership rather than a solitary crusade. As she carefully photographed key documents with her phone, Martha thought of all the faces that had passed through Courtroom 9. The desperate mothers, the addicted sons, the mentally ill veterans, the immigrants who didn't understand the charges against them. Some deserved punishment, certainly. But so many others deserved something the system rarely offered: a second chance. The next morning, Martha arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes earlier than usual, her heart hammering against her ribs, despite decades of practiced calm. As defendants and attorneys filed into Courtroom 9, she maintained her customary invisibility, setting up her stenotype with mechanical precision. Only the slightest tremor in her fingers betrayed her anticipation as Judge Chen entered and called the court to order. The Rodriguez case was third on the docket. Martha watched the young public defender rise, clutching the notes Martha had anonymously provided, looking both nervous and determined as she cited State Fuz Miller and challenged the admissibility of her client's juvenile record. Judge Chen listened attentively, asked several pointed questions that actually helped strengthen the defender's position, and then ruled in favor of the defendant. The prosecution's evidence is inadmissible under clear precedent, Chen declared, her gaze briefly meeting Martha's across the courtroom. Case dismissed. Later that afternoon, Judge Chen left a sealed envelope on Martha's desk. Inside was a simple note. My chambers, 7 p.m. We have work to do. For 27 years, Martha Simmons had been the silent witness to both justice and injustice in Courtroom 9. For 15 of those years, she had secretly fought to balance the scales when the system tilted too far away from mercy. Now, for the first time, she would step out of the shadows and into a partnership that could reshape not just individual cases, but the entire structure of justice in Westfield County. As she slipped the note into her pocket, Martha allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The Courthouse Angel was about to get wings of steel and the power to truly fly. Justice in Westfield was about to undergo a transformation, and not even Judge Ferguson, with his bourbon and his biases, would be able to stop what was coming. Martha Simmons arrived at Judge Chen's chambers at precisely 7 p.m., her weathered leather satchel containing 15 years of meticulously documented injustices. The hallways stood eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of the night janitor's floor buffer providing any soundtrack. She hesitated at the heavy oak door, her hand suspended in mid-knock, as doubt suddenly clouded her resolve. What if this was an elaborate trap? Martha had violated countless procedural rules over the years. If exposed, she faced not just termination, but potential criminal charges. Yet something about Judge Chen's direct gaze that morning had resonated with Martha's own carefully hidden idealism. Taking a deep breath, she knocked 3 times. "Right on time?" Judge Chen said, gesturing Martha inside. The chambers looked transformed. The imposing desk now covered with case files, statistical printouts, and architectural drawings of the courthouse. A digital projector illuminated one wall with conviction rates by judge, demographic, and offense type. "You've been busy," Martha observed cautiously, setting down her satchel. Judge Chen nodded, her judicial composure replaced by intensity. 6 months of observations and data collection, she explained. But what I've compiled is nothing compared to what you must know after 27 years in these courtrooms. She fixed Martha with a direct gaze. "Before we begin, I need to know, how far are you willing to go to fix what's broken here?" "I've dedicated over half my life to creating an invisible safety net for people the system would otherwise destroy," Martha replied, finally opening her satchel. "I've risked my career, my reputation, and my freedom because I couldn't bear to keep transcribing injustice without doing something about it." She removed a thick folder labeled Ferguson Patterns and placed it on the desk. Judge Ferguson has sentenced first-time non-violent offenders to maximum terms 93% more frequently when they're Black or Hispanic. I've documented 372 specific cases. Another folder joined the first. Public Defender Crisis. Our public defenders average 7 minutes per case before plea agreements. 78% of defendants plead guilty regardless of evidence because they can't afford bail and can't risk losing their jobs while awaiting trial. Judge Chen studied Martha's face, then nodded with satisfaction. "I suspected as much when I reviewed your personnel file. 27 years in the same position, declining 3 promotions that would have taken you out of the courtroom." The judge tapped a slim folder. "What your file doesn't explain is how a court stenographer with no formal legal training has managed to identify procedural loopholes even experienced attorneys miss." Martha felt her pulse quicken. Her careful anonymity had always been paramount. "With respect, Your Honor, I've worked hard to keep others from being implicated in my activities." Judge Chen raised a reassuring hand. "I'm not asking you to name anyone. What I'm proposing isn't an investigation of your methods, but a formalization of your results." The judge moved to the projected display, gesturing at a flowchart labeled Westfield Justice Reform Initiative. "I've been developing a comprehensive proposal for structural changes, bail reform, standardized sentencing guidelines, mandatory review of racial disparities, increased funding for public defenders, and a community oversight board with actual authority." Chen's voice grew animated. "But proposals without evidence are just wishful thinking. What I lack is the detailed documentation to prove these reforms are necessary, documentation that you've been compiling for 15 years. Martha studied the intricate reform plan with amazement. This went far beyond her case-by-case interventions. This was systematic change. "The Chief Judge would never approve this," Martha said practically. Judge Chen smiled with satisfaction. "Chief Judge Morton announced his early retirement yesterday. The governor will appoint his replacement next month." She paused meaningfully. "I clerked for the governor during law school. She's indicated that with sufficient evidence of systemic problems, she would consider appointing someone committed to reform." Martha felt a surge of forbidden hope. "And you want my evidence to build that case?" Chen nodded. "Not just the evidence, your expertise, your insight into how this courthouse actually functions versus how it's supposed to function. Martha, you've been the shadow conscience of this courthouse for 15 years. I'm offering you the chance to step into the light and transform your guerrilla justice operation into institutional change." "If we do this," Martha said, "we need to protect the people who've helped me over the years." Judge Chen retrieved a document from her desk. "Amnesty provision, page 7. Full protection for past procedural violations done in pursuit of equitable justice." Martha scanned the document, a firewall between past unofficial interventions and the new system they hoped to build. "One more condition," Martha said firmly. "This can't just be about building your judicial career. These aren't statistics. They're people's lives." Far from being offended, Judge Chen smiled with respect. "I expected nothing less from the Courthouse Angel." At Martha's startled expression, she explained, "That's what some defendants call you. The invisible force that somehow steers them away from the worst outcomes." For the next 3 weeks, they continued their nightly strategy sessions, gradually expanding their circle to include carefully vetted allies, a senior public defender whose idealism had somehow survived 15 years in the trenches, a court clerk with a phenomenal memory for procedural details, a bailiff whose kindness toward defendants masked a brilliant mind for security logistics. Meanwhile, Martha continued her daily stenographer duties, maintaining her cover while gathering fresh evidence of systemic failures. The double life was exhausting, but exhilarating. For the first time, her work had purpose beyond individual interventions. The turning point came unexpectedly. During a routine hearing, Martha noticed Chief Judge Morton in the back row of the gallery, his presence at routine hearings unprecedented. The following morning, a summons waited on her desk. "Chief Judge's chambers, 9 a.m. Martha's throat tightened with apprehension as she made her way to the executive floor. Chief Judge Carlton Morton sat behind his massive desk, imposing, even-seated. "Ms. Simmons," he began, "I've been reviewing unusual patterns in case outcomes over the past decade. Cases where procedural irregularities led to more lenient outcomes for certain defendants." Morton tapped a folder that looked disturbingly similar to Martha's own documentation. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice an entire shadow justice system operating under my nose?" Martha maintained her composure through sheer force of will. "With respect, Your Honor," she said, squaring her shoulders, "I noticed injustice happening under your nose for 15 years. I simply chose to do something about it." The silence stretched until Martha could hear the ticking of the antique clock. Finally, Morton's stern expression cracked, giving way to something like respect. "That's exactly what Judge Chen said you'd say." At Martha's startled expression, Morton actually chuckled. "Did you think you were the only one concerned about justice in this courthouse? When Governor Winters approached me about early retirement, I had one condition. My replacement would be someone committed to authentic reform." A weary smile crossed his face. "I've spent the past month building the case for appointing Judge Chen as my successor. Your documentation will be invaluable in convincing the Judicial Committee." Martha stood in the courthouse elevator, her finger hovering over the buttons. For 27 years, she had pressed only 2, ground floor lobby and second floor courtrooms. Today, she pressed the 4th, executive administration, with newfound confidence. 2 weeks had passed since Chief Judge Morton's surprising revelation of his support for their reform initiative. The guerrilla justice operation had transformed into a legitimate movement with powerful backing. Still, Martha maintained her daily stenographer routine with meticulous precision. Their strategy depended on absolute secrecy until the governor announced Chen as Morton's replacement. Inside the conference room, the conversation halted as Martha entered. Around the polished mahogany table sat their unlikely coalition: Judge Sophia Chen, Chief Judge Carlton Morton, Elijah Washington, the veteran public defender whose idealism had miraculously survived 2 decades in the trenches; Diana Ortiz, the court clerk whose phenomenal memory had saved countless defendants from administrative disasters; Officer James Reynolds, the compassionate bailiff with a brilliant strategic mind; and Andrea Coleman, a community activist who helped former inmates reintegrate. 6 pairs of eyes watched Martha expectantly. "The angel arrives," Washington said with a respectful nod. "Now we can begin. Let's review our timeline." Judge Chen began, distributing folders. "The governor will announce Morton's retirement next Tuesday, with my appointment as interim chief judge pending full confirmation. That gives us a 6-week window before my confirmation hearing to quietly position our initiatives." Morton nodded gravely. "The Judicial Committee isn't our only hurdle. District Attorney Caldwell has already contacted me expressing concerns about a potential departure from proven prosecutorial practices." Martha translated silently. Caldwell feared his 92% conviction rate, the foundation of his political ambitions, might suffer under reform-minded leadership. "We need to frame these changes in language that neutralizes political opposition," she suggested. "Every reform must emphasize public safety and fiscal responsibility alongside justice." Martha placed her 15 years of documentation on the table, evidence organized by systemic patterns. "Based on my records, I've identified 3 areas where reform offers immediate benefits without triggering political backlash. First, standardized bail hearings with income-based assessments. Second, guaranteed minimum preparation time for public defenders before plea discussions. Third, expanded pretrial diversion programs for non-violent first offenders." She highlighted statistical projections. "These changes would reduce our pretrial detention population by 37% within 6 months, saving the county approximately $2 million annually while actually improving appearance rates." The room fell silent. "Martha," Washington said finally, "how long have you been developing these projections?" She met his gaze. "Since my 3rd year as a stenographer, when I realized individual interventions would never be enough." The following week unfolded according to plan. Chief Judge Morton announced his retirement, citing family reasons while tactfully avoiding mention of the reform agenda he had secretly helped design. Governor Winters named Judge Chen as interim replacement, praising her commitment to efficient administration of justice. Meanwhile, the Reform Roundtable members quietly laid groundwork for their initiatives. Washington approached fellow public defenders about standardized preparation periods. Ortiz developed streamlined procedures for income-based bail determinations. Coleman organized community leaders to support expanded diversion programs. The coalition's careful strategy might have continued unfolding perfectly, if not for Jason Rodriguez. The young man whose case had first connected Martha and Judge Chen returned to courtroom 9, desperate and disheveled. His previously dismissed charges had been reinstated through an obscure procedural maneuver, one that Martha recognized immediately as Judge Ferguson's favorite tactic for punishing defendants who escaped his harsh sentencing. "Your Honor," the public defender began, clearly unprepared, "we request a continuance to review these new filings." Ferguson's smile carried predatory satisfaction. "Motion denied. The prosecution has presented sufficient evidence to proceed immediately." Martha's fingers moved automatically across her stenotype, recording the exchange while her mind raced. This wasn't just about Rodriguez. This was Ferguson sending a message. Martha watched Rodriguez's shoulders slump as hope drained from his expression. Without thinking, she cleared her throat, a sound so unprecedented from the silent stenographer that every head turned. "Your Honor," she said, addressing Ferguson with calm she didn't feel. The court reporter notes a potential jurisdictional issue with the refiling procedure that may require review before proceeding. The courtroom froze in collective shock. Court reporters did not speak during proceedings. They certainly did not challenge judges' rulings. Ferguson's face darkened. "Miss Simmons, your role is to record these proceedings, not interrupt them." Martha nodded respectfully. "I apologize, Your Honor, but Court Procedural Rule 619 requires reporters to note potential jurisdictional conflicts when observed." There was no such rule, but Martha gambled on Ferguson's notorious disinterest in procedural details. The gambit succeeded. Ferguson's uncertainty manifested as officiousness. "This matter is continued until Monday for jurisdictional review." When the courtroom emptied, Ferguson approached her station, voice lowered to a threatening whisper. "Whatever game you're playing, Ms. Simmons, remember that court reporters serve at judicial discretion. 27 years means nothing if I recommend termination." Martha met his gaze steadily. "I understand completely, Your Honor. I'll ensure my concern about Rule 619 is documented in today's official transcript, the one that goes to the Administrative Review Board." Ferguson retreated, muttering about verification of procedures as he disappeared into his chambers. Martha waited until the courtroom emptied before texting Judge Chen. "Ferguson targeting Rodriguez. Intervention needed." Within an hour, Chen had engineered an administrative reassignment of Rodriguez's case to her courtroom through a legitimate procedural rule. By afternoon, Rodriguez was released on minimal bail with a court date scheduled after Chen's expected confirmation as chief judge. The victory felt different from Martha's previous behind-the-scenes manipulations, more direct, more visible, but also more dangerous. She had broken her cover, revealing herself as an active player rather than a passive observer. When she arrived home that evening, a manila envelope waited on her doorstep. Inside, she found printed photographs of herself entering Judge Chen's chambers at night, meeting with Washington, even sorting through files in the records room after hours. A typed note contained just 5 words. "We know what you're doing." Instead of fear, Martha felt strange relief as she studied the surveillance photos. The shadows she had operated within for 15 years were dispelling, forcing her resistance into the open. She called an emergency meeting of the Reform Roundtable. "We've been compromised," she announced, spreading the photographs across Morton's conference table. "Someone knows about our coalition and is attempting intimidation." Rather than panic, her revelation sparked strategic determination. "We accelerate the timeline," Chen decided. "Instead of waiting for my confirmation, we announce the first reform package immediately, with Morton's public endorsement." The chief judge nodded. "We frame it as administrative efficiency measures already in development during my tenure. Take away their narrative before they can establish it." The anonymous threat had not weakened their resolve, but crystallized it, transforming a careful reform initiative into a public movement for justice. "All rise. Court is now in session, the Honorable Judge Sophia Chen presiding." The bailiff's announcement carried more weight than usual as Martha took her position behind the stenotype. Monday morning had arrived with unexpected developments. Ferguson's ethics complaint against Judge Chen had been filed as threatened, but had disappeared into administrative limbo after Chief Judge Morton personally reviewed it and deemed it procedurally insufficient. Meanwhile, 3 local news outlets had received anonymous packages containing Martha's meticulously documented evidence of sentencing disparities in Ferguson's courtroom, complete with statistical analyses comparing outcomes by race and income level. Martha's expression remained professionally neutral as she prepared to record the morning's proceedings, but her mind raced with strategic calculations. Their coalition had agreed on a bold response to Ferguson's threat. Instead of retreating, they would accelerate, announcing not just procedural reforms, but a comprehensive transformation of the Westfield County justice system. Judge Chen entered with characteristic poise, her judicial robes billowing slightly as she took her seat at the bench. If she felt nervous about the afternoon's press conference or Ferguson's ethics complaint, nothing in her demeanor betrayed it. "Good morning, counsel," she began, addressing the day's first case with focused efficiency. The morning docket proceeded with deceptive normality. Only those who knew where to look would notice the subtle shifts already in motion. Public defenders granted reasonable continuances rather than pressured into immediate pleas. Bail determinations that considered financial circumstances rather than arbitrary amounts. Diversion program referrals for eligible cases that would previously have resulted in incarceration. Small changes, implemented within Judge Chen's existing authority, but revolutionary in their cumulative effect. Each decision laid groundwork for the formal announcement to come, demonstrating the practical benefits of their reform vision before resistance could organize. Chief Judge Morton entered the conference room during lunch recess, interrupting their final preparations. "There's been a development," he announced, his expression grave. "District Attorney Caldwell has requested an emergency injunction to prevent today's press conference, claiming it represents inappropriate political activism by judicial officers." The room fell silent as implications registered. "On what grounds?" Judge Chen demanded. "He's arguing that reform announcements by sitting judges violate separation of powers and constitute improper influence over ongoing cases." Morton's smile held grim satisfaction. "Fortunately, the emergency petition landed on my docket. I've scheduled a hearing for next month. By then, our first reforms will already be implemented." "There's one more thing," Morton continued, his gaze settling on Martha. "Caldwell specifically named you in his petition, questioning the propriety of a court stenographer participating in policy development." Martha's pulse quickened, but her expression remained composed. "Technically, I'm participating in administrative efficiency reviews within my professional capacity," she replied, quoting language they had carefully crafted to protect her position. "Every recommendation is supported by statistical analysis of court records, which falls squarely within my expertise." Morton nodded approval. "Precisely what I noted in my preliminary ruling. However, this targeting suggests someone has identified you as a vulnerable point in our coalition." Martha considered this assessment with detached practicality. "I've been preparing for exposure for 15 years, Your Honor. My documentation is impeccable, my interventions untraceable. Let them investigate." At precisely 2 p.m., Martha took her position on the courthouse steps alongside the Reform Roundtable members. The assembled crowd exceeded even Andrea's optimistic projections. Journalists with cameras and microphones jostled for position among community advocates, holding signs with slogans like "Justice, not just us," and "Bail reform now." Morton approached the microphone with dignified confidence, his silver hair catching afternoon sunlight as he prepared to deliver his final official act as Chief Judge. "For 9 years, I have administered justice in Westfield County according to established procedures and precedents," he began, voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Today, I announce a comprehensive initiative to make those procedures more effective, more equitable, and more economically sustainable. As Morton concluded, he gestured toward Judge Chen, officially passing leadership to his successor. Implementation of these reforms will be my first priority as interim chief judge, Chen declared, stepping forward. Cameras flashed as she detailed specific changes: standardized bail procedures, guaranteed preparation time for public defenders, expanded diversion programs, each presented with supporting data illustrating both humanitarian and economic benefits. Martha stood slightly behind the judicial officers, her usual invisibility gradually yielding to reluctant recognition as Chen acknowledged the dedicated court staff whose statistical analysis made these improvements possible. The acknowledgement was deliberately vague, protecting Martha's specific contribution while establishing precedent for her continued involvement. A voice cut through the applause following Chen's presentation. Judge Chen, how do you respond to allegations that these reforms undermine criminal accountability? The questioner, a reporter from the conservative local paper, clutched a document that Martha recognized immediately as Ferguson's ethics complaint. Chen met the challenge directly. These reforms enhance accountability by ensuring proper procedure in every case. Justice rushed is justice compromised. When defenders have adequate preparation time, when bail reflects actual flight risk rather than income level, when first-time non-violent offenders receive appropriate interventions, the entire system functions more effectively. She gestured toward Washington. Our public defender's office will address specific procedural improvements. The strategic pivot directed attention away from judicial politics toward practical implementation details. As Washington fielded technical questions, Martha noticed movement at the courthouse entrance. Judge Ferguson had appeared, watching the proceedings with barely concealed fury. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded steps. Ferguson's expression promised continued resistance, but Martha felt only calm resolve. The Courthouse Angel had operated for 15 years through whispered information and anonymous notes. Now, justice would advance through transparent policy, institutional reform, and collaborative leadership. The shadows had served their purpose, providing cover until allies could gather and strategies could develop. But lasting change required sunlight, public accountability, documented evidence, and open debate about the principles underlying their justice system. Well played, Ms. Simmons. The voice belonged to Jason Rodriguez, whose case had inadvertently accelerated their timeline. Martha turned to find him watching her with undisguised admiration. I figured it out weeks ago. Whenever you were in the courtroom, things worked differently. Files appeared at just the right moment. Public defenders suddenly had relevant precedents. Even judges seemed to rule differently. Martha maintained professional neutrality despite her surprise at being recognized. The justice system is complex, Mr. Rodriguez. Outcomes depend on many factors. He smiled knowingly, including court reporters who care more about fairness than following bad rules. Thank you. For everything. Before she could respond, he continued. There are others who've noticed too, former defendants who received mysterious help. We're organizing to support these reforms. The Courthouse Angel has more allies than you know. Rodriguez departed, leaving Martha contemplating this unexpected development. For 15 years, she had assumed her interventions remained anonymous, her impact unrecognized by those she helped. The revelation that defendants had noticed patterns, had identified her role without exposing it, shifted something fundamental in her understanding of her work. She had never sought credit or recognition, considering herself simply a counterbalance to institutional indifference. Yet knowing that those she'd helped recognized and valued her efforts enough to organize support for systemic reforms, completed a circle she hadn't realized needed closing. Martha returned to courtroom 9, resuming her position behind the stenotype with renewed purpose. The weeks following the press conference brought both progress and resistance. Judge Chen's confirmation hearing before the Judicial Committee became a battlefield for competing visions of justice, with Ferguson and Caldwell mobilizing opposition, while Morton and Washington advocated for reform. Martha's role evolved from clandestine intervention to official consultation. Her statistical analyses and procedural expertise formally recognized through appointment to a newly established Court Efficiency Review Panel. The first phase reforms faced bureaucratic delays and political challenges, but advanced steadily with documented positive outcomes. Pre-trial detention decreased 26% in the first month. Public defender preparation time tripled without extending overall case duration. Diversion program enrollments doubled with 94% completion rates. 1 year had passed since the Reform Roundtable's dramatic press conference on the courthouse steps. What had begun as Martha's solitary crusade had blossomed into institutional transformation. The Westfield County justice system now operated with unprecedented transparency, leading regional statistics in reduced recidivism, lower incarceration costs, and higher community satisfaction. Chief Judge Chen's confirmation had survived Ferguson's opposition, solidifying reform leadership for years to come. Martha's position had evolved too, from invisible court stenographer to respected court efficiency administrator, her experience and analytical skills finally recognized as essential assets. This morning, she reviewed implementation reports with quiet satisfaction. Numbers told the story. Pre-trial detention down 43%. Public defender case success up 61%. Diversion program graduation rates at 87%. Martha's intercom buzzed. "Ms. Simmons, Judge Ferguson is requesting a moment of your time." Martha's eyebrows rose in surprise. Despite reforms proceeding throughout the courthouse, Ferguson had maintained cool professional distance from the Reform Roundtable, implementing required changes with minimal cooperation and maximal resentment. "Send him in," Martha responded, curiosity overcoming caution. Ferguson entered moments later, his judicial confidence dimmed but not extinguished. Without waiting for invitation, he settled into the chair opposite Martha's desk. "Court Efficiency Administrator," he finally said, gesturing toward her nameplate. Quite a promotion from recording other people's words. Martha maintained professional courtesy despite the implied dismissal. "How can I help you, Judge Ferguson?" Ferguson placed a folder on her desk. Case files for a defendant scheduled for sentencing in his courtroom tomorrow. Marcus Wilson, 19, third strike drug possession. Mandatory minimum under current guidelines, 8 years. Martha reviewed the documentation with practiced efficiency, immediately noting details that would have previously prompted her clandestine intervention. Clear addiction issues unaddressed by previous incarcerations. Community college enrollment interrupted by arrest. Strong family support system undermined by excessive bail requirements. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, professional caution replacing curiosity. Ferguson's expression revealed uncharacteristic uncertainty. "The mandatory minimum applies, but under Chen's new diversion eligibility standards, he would qualify for the addiction treatment program instead." Understanding dawned slowly. "You're asking for my assessment of alternative placement options." Ferguson nodded stiffly. "Your procedural knowledge appears to have value in certain cases." "Why now?" Martha asked, as Ferguson prepared to leave with her recommendations. He paused at the door, judicial arrogance briefly giving way to genuine reflection. 94% of your diversion placements are succeeding. My traditional sentencing has 68% recidivism. Those numbers require consideration." With that minimalist acknowledgement, he departed, leaving Martha contemplating the ultimate vindication. Data-driven reform, converting even its most determined opponent. Ferguson would never join their coalition, would never acknowledge the moral dimensions of their work. But he had begun engaging with evidence on its merits, rather than rejecting change categorically. At precisely 4 p.m., Martha entered courtroom 3 for Jason Rodriguez's graduation ceremony. The space had been transformed from adversarial arena to community celebration. Rodriguez's family occupied front row seats, pride evident in their posture. Representatives from the diversion program, public defender's office, and community support services filled remaining spaces. Chief Judge Chen presided not in judicial robes, but in professional attire, symbolically shifting from authority figure to community leader. Martha took her customary position slightly removed from center stage, court reporter's instinct for observation overriding her official status. Rodriguez entered last, his confident stride contrasting sharply with the dejected posture he had displayed during his original hearing. As Rodriguez accepted his program completion certificate, his gaze found Martha among the observers. With a slight nod, he acknowledged the invisible thread connecting them. The moment when an anonymous court stenographer had spoken against injustice, initiating the cascade of interventions that led to this ceremony. Chen outlined Rodriguez's accomplishments: perfect attendance at counseling sessions, community service hours exceeding requirements, straight A's in resumed community college courses. "Mr. Rodriguez has also been selected for our courthouse internship program," Chen announced. "He will join our administrative team while completing his associate degree, bringing valuable perspective to our ongoing reform efforts." Following the ceremony, Martha found herself surrounded by Rodriguez's family. "He told us about you," Mrs. Rodriguez said simply, "about the stenographer who spoke up when no one else would." Martha attempted deflection, uncomfortable with personalization of systemic improvement. "The reforms are collaborative efforts involving many dedicated professionals." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled knowingly. "The reforms, yes. But that first intervention? That was just you, deciding one more injustice was one too many." Before Martha could respond, Rodriguez himself joined them. "You're starting Monday as court efficiency intern," Martha informed him, extending an official welcome package. "The position includes flexible scheduling around your classes and potential advancement after graduation." "I have one question before accepting," Rodriguez replied, unexpected seriousness replacing celebration. "Will I be allowed to work on reform implementation?" Martha studied him, recognizing determination that mirrored her own decades-long commitment. "That's precisely why you've been selected. We need perspectives from those who've experienced the system from both sides." Rodriguez nodded satisfaction. "Then I have a proposal to discuss during my first week. Several former defendants have formed an advocacy network, people whose cases were influenced by the Courthouse Angel before reforms became official. We want to formalize our involvement in the monitoring process, ensuring changes actually reach those most affected." 1 week later, Judge Chen called Martha to her chambers with unexpected news. "The governor's office called this morning. They're establishing a statewide Justice Reform Commission. Want you as executive director." Martha's surprise must have shown despite practiced neutrality. Chen continued, "Your combination of procedural expertise and moral commitment is unique. The Westfield reforms have attracted national attention, opportunity to implement similar changes across the state. For 28 years, Martha had operated within a single courthouse. The prospect of broader influence represented the culmination of a journey she had never consciously planned, but had been unconsciously preparing for throughout her career. "What about Westfield?" Martha asked, professional responsibility overriding personal ambition. "The reforms still need supervision." Chen smiled, understanding. "Systems outlast individuals when properly designed. You've built processes that function through institutional commitment rather than personal intervention. Rodriguez and his advocacy network will ensure reforms reach those who need them. Washington's strengthened public defender office will maintain vigilant representation. Your most important achievement isn't specific policies, but cultural transformation. Justice as fundamental orientation rather than exceptional outcome." As Martha departed Westfield County Courthouse one final time, she paused on the same steps where their reform initiative had been publicly announced 1 year earlier. The building remained physically unchanged. Same imposing columns, same heavy doors, same symbolic scales above the entrance. Yet everything inside had transformed through patient determination and collective commitment. Martha remembered countless days entering those doors with only a stenotype case in hand, gradually developing shadow methods to mitigate injustices that institutional processes ignored or created. Now she departed with authority to implement similar reforms statewide, her expertise recognized and her vision validated beyond anything she could have imagined during 15 years of solitary resistance. The Courthouse Angel had completed her local mission not through miraculous intervention, but through persistent system building, creating justice processes that functioned through proper channels rather than despite them.